I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Training camp is already in full swing. We're on the eve of preseason, and just in time for all of that, the Chris Johnston Show is finally alive. On a scale of 1 to 10, CJ, how excited are you that the show with your face, your name, all in the bright lights is finally out there for everyone to listen to? On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you?
I'm a 12 or a 13. I can't be limited to 10. Don't limit me between 1 and 10 because it's a higher level of excitement than that can contain.
Oh my God. Like, just seeing your energy on the Steve Dangle podcast, like, I'm ready to go now. And thank God we're able to go now. But there's a lot of stuff I want to get into with the podcast and how we're feeling about it, and what it'll look like, what it'll sound like for everyone. I know the basic details with it is that, we're going to be out twice a week, but I know if we want to do it before the end of the show, we can go into, more about the process and more about what you got going on with the Toronto Star. But I know you want to talk about puck. You want to talk about hockey. You want to talk about the headlines. That's what everyone is here for. That's why I'm involved, to tell you the truth here, man. I really want to be clued into what you got going on, CJ. So let's not waste any more time. Let's go into some of the headlines that we're going to cover into today for today's episode. We're going to talk Jack EIchel. We're going to talk Vancouver Canucks, and we're going to talk Seattle Kraken. I'm very intrigued, especially about Jack EIchel, because what's going on in Buffalo right now is just a total mess. And me even calling it a mess is basically underscoring what's going on. Why is it still a mess? Why is it that Buffalo can't seem to just resolve this Jack EIchel situation?
Well, look, no one's winning right now. I think that much is pretty clear. This isn't an ideal situation for the organization, and it's certainly not an ideal situation for the player. And, in this case, what strikes me is they got to find a way to get Jack EIchel healthy. And what hasn't changed all summer long, there was a meeting with the league at one point between Jack EIchel's camp and the Sabres and senior league, officials, is they can't agree on how is best to do that. By now, everyone that's dialed into this understands Jack EIchel wants a type of surgical procedure on his neck that is relatively unproven among athletes in contact sports. The Sabres doctors are more in favor of him doing, or completely in favor of him doing, a spinal fusion, neck fusion type of surgery. And that's the fundamental breaking point here, because any team that wants to trade for Jack EIchel, presumably if you trade for him, first of all, you're fine with him doing the surgery the Sabres don't want him to do, because I can't imagine anyone else wants to inherit this stalemate. And secondly, he could be out, 6 months after getting that type of surgery. And so, as we're sitting here so close to the start of the season, I just don't see a reason other than his immense talent why this kind of trade would happen right now. And so that's kind of where we're at. I mean, obviously a little bit of a messy start to training camp, the Sabres stripping of his captaincy and all those types of things. But what this is missing, I think, first of all, is just the first step. What's the best process here to get him healthy? How can that happen? Because ultimately he's an easier player to trade when he's going to play.
I'm just curious, because this has been going on all summer. I'm sure there has to be at least one team that might have been close. Were there any teams that were actually really close to getting Jack EIchel, or has no one just bothered to touch this situation?
There were teams certainly very interested in Jack EIchel. None of those teams feel like they were close. And, part of that here too, which is not the primary part, of this discussion, is that the Sabres need to get a haul to make this work. They were saying earlier this summer, it's got to be 4 pieces. And we're not talking about 4 third liners or fourth liners. Obviously you're looking at, whether it's first round picks, top prospects, perhaps impact players that can play in your lineup. I mean, this is the type of player, quite frankly, that doesn't get traded a lot in the NHL. And so, I think that was certainly an impediment. But teams, did engage with Buffalo. It just never seemed like anything got too close. I don't think anything's close, certainly as we're talking right now, a couple of days into camp here. And the date I'm looking at, Julian, is July 1st, 2022. That's the day that Jack EIchel gets an no-move clause. And this will become an even more difficult transaction to make on July 1st, 2022. Now, there's a ton of time between then and now, theoretically, but, I think that's got to be some kind of pressure point here as time goes along for the Sabres to make a move, for there to be some progress on the health front, because, I don't think that they want to get to next summer and then have Jack Eichel be able to veto the process with his no move clause.
So if you're the Sabres, what do you do now? Because obviously he's not healthy enough to play. He wants the surgery to happen. He's just going to sit there. You're just going to have a $10 million superstar just sitting. Is that essentially that all the Sabres can just do?
I think so. Unless if they're able to find a trade partner. I think that what the Sabres could do, and I'm certainly not saying they will do this, maybe they can lower the trade ask. That might be one way to make this work, is if they look for a little bit less in the trade. I know that might sound kind of crazy, because you're going Jack Eichel, second overall pick, one of the best young players in the NHL, presumably, and we hope that he's able to get to a point where he can perform at the level he was beforehand. If that's the case, he's still got lots of good years ahead of him. He's not too old of a player. That might be the only thing that I could see pushing this along. That, or of course, if they can find some kind of middle ground. I don't know if there is a middle ground. One side wants this surgery, the other side wants that surgery. There's not another surgery in the middle that's, it's not like a negotiation with money or something where you can split the difference. And so beyond agreeing on some kind of treatment plan, I think what would be a positive step. The other might be trying to get a little more creative or different with what the trade looks like.
Because earlier in the summer, my thinking of this, not to kind of project it, obviously I don't know as much about this whole situation as you do, but my thinking was just with all the teams out there that are looking for centers, even if you're going to have to sit through a couple of months where he has the surgery and he has to sit out. I was thinking a team like an LA before they signed to Philip Deneau. We know about Vegas and their center issues. I was trumpeting up the Montreal Canadiens, looking at their center depth and what they had and what they were trying to do. And the fact that Shea Weber was going to be on LTIR. I think there was such an opportunity for the Buffalo Sabres to at least find a trading partner to offload Jack Eichel, and maybe they would have gotten, I think, 4 first-round pick or equivalent assets. I think that's what was reported out there. You could always correct me if I'm wrong. But now, in this particular situation, there's no way, as far as I'm concerned, that the Buffalo Sabres could ever come out as a winner in a Jack Eichel trade. They've let their asset depreciate over this time. He's still injured, still hasn't gotten any surgery. If they decrease the ask, this looks bad on Kevin Adams. This looks bad on the organization, and an organization that was already in the shit, considering how their team has looked. And it just looks even worse with this whole situation. I don't know if other general managers have just been taking stock in what's been going on here, or other players have been looking at this as well. But this doesn't look good on the Sabres. And I can't imagine for at least people around NHL circles who care that they're not, noticing this and not saying hey, this is some crazy shit that's going on in Buffalo and it's not good.
Well, and what you're highlighting is that if you're a contending team, which there are contenders out there that could use another premium center, why would you step in and make this trade now? And you've seen this summer go by. Obviously, teams have had discussions. No one got to the point even where they felt like they were close to making this deal. And so naturally, it's like a house that sits on the market for too long in real estate, right? I mean, you're going to think that the price has to come down over time. I mean, even over time, the other teams will be aware that no move clause is going to be a little bit of a pressure point. Or, another season is going to go by here potentially where Jack Eichel is unable to play. That's just 1 year closer to unrestricted free agency for him. I know he's got 5 years, including this one on his contract. So there's lots of, you're buying some security with that aspect of things. But, I agree that this is not a player that's going to become more attractive on the market the longer his health is unresolved, the longer it's been since his last official game, and the more time goes on. And so, I think that really the window in some ways passed around the entry draft, prior to the free agency period. First of all, picks that get moved right at the entry draft, like we saw, a top 10 pick go for Seth Jones, right? Columbus got to make that pick right that day. So yes, it's painful to lose Seth Jones if you're the Columbus Blue Jackets, but then you're adding a pretty highly ranked prospect immediately that night. I mean, picks tend to be more valued right at the draft because there's no wait for, what they are. Once that came and went, then teams, a couple of days later, free agency starts, teams start spending money. The LA Kings go and make a big splash, as you mentioned, get Philip Deneau. Well, it starts to take them out of this idea that they could fit a Jack Eichel in there. And so, it really is a tough situation. I don't envy anyone that's in the middle of this situation. I don't believe Kevin Adams by any stretch doesn't want Jack Eichel to play hockey again somewhere else or anything like that. He's got to make the right decision for his owners and try to help his organization. He's in a very difficult spot. And Jack Eichel, as we've all learned about his rights in the CBA, the same as any player, doesn't have full control over, what treatments happen to his body when a hockey-related injury comes about. And so this is really a situation that's very complex with a lot of layers. And I think it's going to drag on for quite a bit more time.
Well, hopefully in the case of the Buffalo Sabres, not until July 2022, when, of course, as you mentioned, the NMC kicks in. This next question I have kind of transitions over into the next topic I want to discuss here. The Vancouver Canucks and the fact that their two stars, Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, RFAs, still remain unsigned. Would you rather be the general manager of the Buffalo Sabres and try to offload Jack Eichel, or would you rather be Jim Benning in Vancouver and have $14 million in cap space to figure out a way to sign both Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes?
With respect to how difficult this Canucks situation is, I still think I'd rather be Jim Benning because, obviously in this case, he's still got two really, really, really good young players, and these guys want to play hockey, right? Like ultimately, yes, there's a contract stalemate at the moment. They haven't been able to solve it. It's complex, and I think we'll get into that a little bit here, Julian. Some of the working mechanisms that are going on in this rather unique negotiation, just that you have two young stars, literally the two best players on your team, represented by the same agency, skating together right now, along with Brady Tkachuk, a restricted free agent from Ottawa in Michigan. They're all staying in shape while working through their various business decisions here. And, as you mentioned, the Canucks have been in a very difficult cap position really for a couple seasons now. I thought Jim Benning did a nice job, quite honestly, in July. You had a couple buyouts, Jake Virtanen and Braden Holtby, made that monster deal with Arizona in which he was able to offload, some of his cap headaches from his bottom six. I think, there was some progress there, but, one thing I do question, and obviously I'm not in the negotiation and I've got hindsight here, but, I wonder if he could have pushed harder to get these deals done earlier on, because, what's happened in my view is the market on both players has increased with some other contracts signed around the league. And that's made this an even more difficult puzzle to line the pieces for.
So is this just a case of Jim Benning waiting? Can you at least just kind of lay out why these two players still haven't been signed yet?
Well, let's approach them individually because, while they are two parts of the puzzle here, I think they have some individual unique aspects of negotiation. My understanding of where Pettersson's at is that, term on both these contracts, I think, is important. In a perfect world, you're trying to sign both of these guys to 8-year deals if you're the Canucks, I think, because you want to buy up and secure all their best seasons in the NHL. You'd basically be buying the remainder of their 20s, whatever they're going to be, whatever their max is going to be, you're covering it with 8-year deals. But there's no way to sign them both to 8-year deals at cap numbers that they could fit in immediately. And so you start to get into smaller term. And so if we start with Pettersson, it seems like 5 years is something, at least at the moment, that's on the table, that I think that there's some comfort there from both sides. Now, not a lot of players get a 5-year deal out of entry level because you're only buying one UFA year if you're the team then, right? And so the player gets to, take another swing of the bat, still pretty young, probably when he's got some great numbers. The most sort of notable recent 5-year deal, the Leafs did that with Austin Matthews. And, Matthews had tremendous leverage in his negotiation, was one of the best goal scorers in the league. The Leafs had to do anything they could to get him signed to any deal at that point in time. And so they were able to get that. I think what the dynamic that's come up with Pettersson is we've just seen Kirill Kaprizov sign a 5-year deal in Minnesota at $9 million. And so the player in that case gets a relatively short term, but he's getting, a pretty big cap number at $9 million, pretty much unprecedented. I would say there's not really a comparable to that situation. My understanding, I think, with Pettersson is that, the sides there are kind of, I think there's an understanding he'll take a little bit less than that $9 million. With Kaprizov, because he's older, Minnesota was able to buy 2 unrestricted free agent years with that contract. Vancouver would only be able to buy 1 with Pettersson on a 5-year deal. And so I think that will probably bring his cap at a little below 9, maybe somewhere between 8.5. I think that there's, that might be the sweet spot. And I really believe what Jim Benning said. He doesn't feel like they're far apart on money. I don't think they are either. I don't think that there's a huge discrepancy there. And so if it ends up being a 5-year deal, I do think it'll be somewhere in that neighborhood. Now with Quinn Hughes, it's a different kind of story. What didn't help him is this Rasmus Dahlin contract. That was a 3-year deal. So we're talking a shorter term now. Quinn Hughes has seen a comparable in Cale Makar get $9 million on his second deal in Colorado earlier this summer. That was on a 6-year term. I think if you see him go down to like a 3-year term, that's a way for Vancouver to limit what his number is. But I think the Canucks have been saying, well, what about the Zach Werenski second contract? In Columbus, Zach Werenski got 3 years times 5. And I think that they thought that was a fair comparable. Well, here along comes Rasmus Dahlin right the day before camp with Buffalo. He signs 3 times 6. So already the number's gone up on a 3-year deal. And I think you could reasonably look at the production of Dahlin and Hughes through this stage of their careers and say that Hughes is worth more. So, I could see a 3-year deal making sense there, but that, if you're talking 8.5 for Pettersson, what are you talking, 7 for Hughes or 6.5, 6? I mean, you can see there where you say somewhere between 14, 15, 16 million, depending on what Vancouver does with some other players, because they are going to use long-term injured reserve. And so they don't have a precise number of cap availability, but they're going to be right up against it when they get these deals done. And I'm of the belief that they will ultimately get done before the regular season starts, but we'll see where these negotiations go.
So my galaxy brain theory about the reason why Pettersson and Hughes are still holding out here is because they wanted nothing to do with that 40s skate that was going on in Vancouver the other day, where we saw like Olli Juolevi like sprawled out, turning himself into a meme. I think someone barfed behind the net here. I think it was Connor Garland. I think that's what I heard was the running name there. And obviously Oliver Ekman-Larsson just struggling to get there. I don't know about you. I'm not a hockey player. I don't skate, but like I would want nothing to do with any of those skates. And if I'm Pettersson and I'm Hughes, I'm taking my sweet time throughout training camp before a deal could happen, because they're training on their own. They're probably not doing 40s.
This is the evolution, man. Like everyone says, all the young players are taking over the league. Like this is some veteran savvy maybe getting out of that kind of skate by these young guys. Maybe not ideal without having your contract, but there's some benefits here by not being there for that day of workout.
I'm telling you, man, if I'm Pettersson and Hughes and I'm seeing the photos of everyone running, I'm like, phew. Pettersson and Hughes between the two.
I bet that group chat was lit.
Yes. Oh, man.
You bet the guys were in there with that.
You're on the phone just like, hey, you suck. You have to go through all that and you have to barf. Hell no, I'm not doing that shit. You crazy? No way.
Well, if they sign long enough, they'll be there for all the future years to do it. So they got to get to – they better not get fat and lazy after getting the money.
Oh, my God, no. Who do you think signs first between Pettersson and Hughes? I get the sense Pettersson might.
It makes some sense. I mean, look, I could see them both signing at the same time just because, again, totally unique dynamic. That they're both represented by Pat Brisson of CAA, and they're together in Michigan. So it would make sense if they're going to fly to Vancouver at some point, sign these deals, get back at camp as soon as possible, that it all sort of happens in tandem. But if you're the Canucks, there is an order. Because Quinn Hughes isn't eligible for an offer sheet. And so you probably would ideally want to sign Pettersson first because Hughes couldn't sign an offer sheet. If you sign Hughes first, there's always the chance, however unlikely, that someone tries to swoop in and overpay him or give him an amount of money you can't match on. And so I would just think from a protection standpoint, if it has to be one over the other, you're going to see Pettersson sign first by the Canucks. But, given all that's at play here, I think it's going to be two guys at the podium, lots of smiles, flew in maybe private together, and then on the ice the same day. You know what I mean? It's good. I think that it's set up to do it in tandem if possible.
Anything else you want to mention about those two players before we move on to the Seattle Kraken and some of the stuff going on there? I just want to make sure we get basically you're like an orange, and I kind of want to squeeze out every possible it's actually a really weird analogy to use on this show, and I'm not going to even finish that. Do you have anything else you want to add on Vancouver before I move on? Jesus Christ.
I'll save you here, but the pressure is going to mount with each passing day. I think that as dug in as they are now, it is real. And anyone who's done a negotiation or been through something like this, it's easy to sit on the sidelines the way we are handicapping it. But as each day goes by, and we're making the jokes about the 40 skate, but hockey's such a team environment, right? Like as much as yeah, they probably don't mind missing that. I think when you see the camaraderie building, you're seeing the guys skate together. Soon they're going to play an exhibition game and 2 and 3, and the regular season gets close. I think that's what's going to push this together, and it will get done before camp.
Okay, before I embarrass myself further, moving on to the Seattle Kraken. What's cracking with the Seattle Kraken? You wrote a great story with the Toronto Star earlier this week with head coach Dave Hakstol, which admittedly, when the hiring was announced, there was a lot of good stories and a lot of, good press around the Kraken. And everyone's like, man, they're making all these great decisions. They seem like this organization that's forward. And then they hired Dave Hakstol, who had those years in Philadelphia where the teams, let's be real here, they weren't necessarily that very good. And that's when I first started to see some question marks and some doubts kind of surround the Kraken here. Like, why would you hire Dave Hakstol? You got the opportunity to talk to him. Do you get the sense that he's kind of, changed his style of a coach, or he's put himself in a position where he's truly ready to take on this new opportunity with this new expansion team?
Well, he certainly knows more, right, Julian? Like, this guy had a tremendous run at the University of North Dakota. One of the better coaches of his generation, the NCAA, and he got hired right from the NCAA to the Flyers. And as much as he knows the game, understands the systems, has been around lots of players that went on and had great NHL careers, I think it's another animal to get thrown into the pace of an NHL season, just getting used to when you can push and pull, how you practice, managing that. He did get 3+ years in Philadelphia. And then I think what's key for him is he spent 2 years as an assistant coach with the Toronto Maple Leafs following him getting fired there, where, one of the things that he and I talked about is he got a chance to sort of step back. And for the first time, I think in 17 years, he was an assistant. He'd been used to leading the way, and the dynamics are different on a coaching staff. And I think he just got to kind of be a bit of a sponge. Obviously, he had some specific responsibilities with the Leafs, namely helping with their defensive play and their penalty kill. The Leafs, while he was there, greatly improved their defensive play at 5-on-5. And so I think you can see his impacts. And I think his hiring gives us a hint, actually, of Seattle's strategy. Because, what we've seen Ron Francis do subsequent to the hiring of Dave Hakstol is amass a ton of defensemen. And, yes, they don't have high-end, absolute game-breaking elite offensive talent. But I think that, in bringing Philip Grubauer in as a free agent, getting Chris Driedger as a goaltender, and then the defenseman he both selected in expansion and signed a couple in free agency, you sort of see how they plan to be built from the start. And I think Dave Hakstol is actually well suited, stylistically to what they want to do. And then he really is just a very strong guy that's been around a fair bit, very high character, not the sort of coach I think that's going to lose his cool too often, which, might be key in establishing a certain dynamic around that team, because, it is so difficult to start something from the beginning. And so I think the longer you're right. It's one of these hires that doesn't get a headline, but I think the more you sort of let it sink in, you think about it and look at what they've done since, I think it actually makes a whole lot of sense. And look, they're going to be playing tight games. That would be my prediction for them this season to start 2-1, 3-2 games and playing a certain style to begin with. And then obviously over time, as they get draft picks and some younger players in, they can maybe, develop more of a high-end elite offensive kind of, type of players.
So with the tight style, let's imagine they actually fulfill your prediction and they go through a lot of those tight games, especially to start off the year. In the division that they're in the Pacific, is that enough? Is that enough to kind of carry them into the playoff race? We know Vegas is in there. We know Edmonton is in there. The Flames are kind of so. The Ducks are in there, and they're not necessarily looking to win. The LA Kings are trying to take that next step. Like, considering the teams that are in that division, how good do you think the Seattle Kraken can be? And I'll throw out this other question. How good do they actually want to be, considering the roster that they have?
Well, they want to be good. They want to be competitive. Look, no one wants to see the reason these draft rules that came into place first with Vegas in 2017 came this way is no one wants to see an 8-win or a 10-win or a 15-win expansion team. Like, if you look back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was a few examples of that where expansion teams literally were winning 1 out of every 10 games. I don't think that's any way to build excitement among a fan base. And from what I can tell from a distance, they're fired up in Seattle for this team. And so, I think that they're well positioned, quite frankly, in a best case scenario to challenge for playoffs. As you highlight, this isn't by anyone's imagination, it's probably the weakest division in the league. at least in terms of depth, a lot of teams that are kind of at various stages of a rebuild or retool or whatever you want to throw on top of that. And so, I do think that Seattle, if they can, bond together quick enough, that's probably the biggest question. There's no identity, right? They don't have one line as training camps in the first couple of days here that they know for sure will work, or one defensive pairing. I mean, obviously they have ideas and they'll try things, but I do think with that kind of style that they just want to be really hard to play against. No easy nights for the opposition. And in that division, I could see them challenging for the playoffs. In fact, I'd be more surprised if they were dreadful than if they're right around a playoff conversation, come April.
Yeah, I mean, in this case for them, I would imagine being middle of the pack isn't bad, right? I know the expectations for expansion teams has kind of changed thanks to the Vegas Golden Knights and the early success that they were able to have. And there's a part of me that would like to see that kind of happen again with the Seattle Kraken, but that was like a 5,000 to 1 odds of that even happening, where they could go to a Stanley Cup final as soon as they did. But also, I just look at this roster, and I'm not going to lie to you, like after like Jared McCann and like Jordan Eberle and all some of the goalies there.
Yanni Gourde, don't be sleeping on Yanni Gourde.
No, sorry. No, I should, as someone who got to watch him from up close, and that's probably the fire truck in the background there telling me, hey, watch out for Yanni Gourde. I got to watch him for a whole year in Syracuse when I was there for a whole year of doing grad studies. And yeah, it's shame on me for forgetting about Yanni Gourde. They have players, they have pieces, but you have to admit, like after like the top 6, and even if you look on defense as well, there are a couple no names and a couple like younger guys who are really just trying to get their bearings.
Yeah, but look, they got 10 defensemen that played at least 10 games last year in a 56-game season. And even the best teams in the league, there are teams, of course, with a better top 4, better top 6 than Seattle. I'm not making that argument, but there are not that many teams that have a 7, 8, 9, 10 as deep as this group. I think that does set up something interesting, though, that teams will be watching as camp goes along, is it's very unclear which players will fill out, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th spot on the team, as we're starting camp now. One thing Dave Hakstol mentioned, he told his coaching staff, is he said, basically try to forget everything you know about any of these players. Like, forget the scouting reports, forget what you've watched on video. We got to judge this camp. Like, we have to decide who's better today. And not, resumes and reputations and those things. But, all those players would have to clear waivers to be sent down to the American Hockey League. And so Seattle doesn't have a cap problem. They would have room for any mix of the 23 players that end up making their opening night roster. But no, they're going to put 3 defensemen, most likely, maybe 2 or 3 anyway, that I think other teams will be looking at on the waiver wire, sometime between now and October 13th. And so, it's a bit of a fluid roster situation, but I think they got a lot of depth there is really that my takeaway. And you're right. They're not wowing anyone if you go right through the lineup, but sometimes the sum of the parts is a little bit better than, the big name, big price talent.
Okay. I think we've gotten through, unless there's anything else I missed with all the 3 main storylines that we wanted to cover on this inaugural edition of the CJ show. I think we've gotten through most of it. So I do want to just kind of, as we wrap up here, just give ourselves a little bit of time just to kind of just process these last like 24 hours, man. Cause like, dude, I know you might've had your doubts too. I admit I had some doubts here and there if this was even going to happen. I'm just really happy that it's happening. And I'm just amazed at how so many people have just been excited for this show to happen. I don't know if you're on the Discord at all for the SDPN. There are people who are literally like waiting up till like 3 a.m. just to see the Steve Dangle podcast episode that we were both on, just to know what the big announcement was. I don't know if you tracked any of that at all, or just how have you been feeling over the last day with all this news going around?
Almost like an out of body experience, to be honest. It's almost like I stepped out of my own body and I'm watching this as an onlooker. As you mentioned, look, we go back 10, 11 months where we talked specifically about this exact show, and it looked like it was going to happen, maybe at the start of last season. It didn't happen. One takeaway there, and I kind of think sometimes things do happen for a reason or whatever. I'm a believer in that, that the universe maybe sorts things out. It's not always the plan you make, but it gives you what you need on some level. And, at that time I had a conversation, we were stopped from doing it. And the person said, we're not sure about podcasts and the only ones that work are unicorns. And, I've had like 8 months now or 7 months to think about that. It's like, let's make a unicorn, man. Like, cause it's true. I get it. There's a lot of people out there with podcasts. There's tons of great hockey podcasts. We're just adding ours to the pile here, but, I'm in this to give it my all. I know you feel the same way, Julian, and I'm really thrilled we got to this point where somehow we're actually recording. Like, again, like I feel like we're having a Zoom chat like we did many times, and we're talking about hockey. But like this time, we're actually going to release this to the world and be judged. And I hope the audience likes it. I hope they interact with us, and we're going to have some fun here. Obviously, we brought you lots of just news tidbits and analysis of what's going on in these big stories, but as we go along, I want you guys to get to know us better, and we want to get to know you better. I mean, that's the way this works for everyone.
Yeah, man. And here's my whole thing about the idea of this podcast being a unicorn, right? Like, we could have easily just been like two dudes who just like hockey and talk about hockey. The market is flooded with podcasts like that. The unique thing about this podcast is that you, Chris, are in the know and are plugged in more than so many other people in hockey media. Like, you're right up there in this country, in Canada, when it comes to being plugged in as a hockey insider. So yeah, we can shoot the shit about hockey if we want to, but you're going to be that guy who's all like, well, yeah, I know this is happening. I know this contract is close to happening. And I think that at the end of the day, in this ecosystem of media that we're in, people thrive on being in the know. And my hope is that every episode that we do, you get to know us a little bit more, but also you feel a little bit smarter or a little bit in the know about what's going on in the National Hockey League. And if we're able to do that, man, I think we have no issues. We're going to be able to do our jobs. But yeah, we're definitely going to do some goofy stuff every now and then and make jokes at each other's expense or whatever, or at Dangle's expense or somebody else. Like, I'm in it for the jokes, but I'm in it for the news too. I'm in it to be informed. Yeah, well, thanks.
And look, I'm always humbled that anyone would take half an hour out of their day to devote time to this, to think about this, to listen to us. Time is our most scarce resource for every single person walking the earth, right? No one ever feels like they have enough of it. So, if this is your break, on your way, your commute to work or to school, if this is a half an hour you're taking away from your life of cleaning or with your kids out for a walk, whatever it is, I'm glad you're choosing to spend it with us. I hope you keep coming back. As I say, I really, Julian, I know you feel the same way. Like, I want to get to know you as much as we can. Yeah. Let us know what you want. Let us know what you don't like. I'm learning this too. Like, honestly, I'm nervous about this in the good way. I don't know how this is going to go. I've been a podcast host, guest rather, a ton. I haven't really had anything like this with my name and my face on it. It's awesome. Like, I'm pumped, but I want it to work. And so let's figure all this out together. I don't know where it's going to end up, but I know it's starting from a spot where, and I'm also, I should say, like, this is it's a weird time in my life, man. I just quit my dream job, kind of. And I don't really have a good, like, an easy way to explain why, but, I was on Hockey Night in Canada for 4 years. Like, that's 4 years. I never thought I would get there. I'm no longer there. I'm taking some risk, as I view it, or I'm challenging myself to, find new ways to engage the audience, find new ways to, express myself. And so, this is a big part of that. And I want you along for the ride, every one of you.
Yo, man, like, just hearing that, I mean, yes, there's slight bias because I'm your friend and host of this show, but I don't know how you don't hear that and you don't want to root for Chris Johnston. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know how you listen to this podcast and you don't just hear that last part and you're just like, oh, I don't care about Chris. No, I want you to succeed. I want this podcast to succeed, obviously, but I want you to succeed, man. And as we will do with this podcast twice a week, we'll be out Mondays and Thursdays. Hopefully we can, inform you, listener, to this podcast, and also just show more of ourselves. And, hopefully you'll root for us too. So thanks so much for tuning in to the inaugural episode of the Chris Johnston Show. As I mentioned again, Mondays and Thursdays going forward, we're going to be putting out episodes. So that means on Monday, we're going to be doing this again, and we're going to be putting out episodes wherever you get podcasts. So Spotify, Apple, I think on YouTube as well. Wherever you get podcasts, you'll be able to find the Chris Johnston Show. Chris, any final thoughts before we officially put a bow on episode 1?
Well, I just want to say something to you, Julian. You
cool.
are the shit, bud. I'm pumped to work with you. I'm cheering for you. I'm in your corner. as I know everyone else is going to be as they get to know you better too. And so let's make this unicorn together. Let's build a community and let's have a lot of fun.
Let's do this. For Chris, I'm Julian saying so long. We'll be back Monday with episode 2 of The Chris Johnston Show.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.